Well, I was born January 24th, 1894, and I have grown up right around here. And then you want any more on and you want to baptize. I was baptized in Nazareth Lutheran Church in 1908. Sunday schools, we had about 5 classes, and I would say 8 to 10 in each class. I was confirmed in 1908 in the Nazareth Lutheran Church, and we spoke the Danish language. Now there's a number of people. Does that mean the confirmand? No, that must mean the number.
Probably. How many people were in the church? We're trying to compare it a little bit with today.
Well, I would say we were about 80 members at that time. And the songs, of course, they were Danish. That is, everything was in Danish.
How long was the Danish language spoken in this congregation?
See, from 1893 to 1942. And then it continued partly Danish and partly English at first. But it wasn't very long. It was all English.
Did they have 2 different services where
Yeah.
one may have been in English and one in Danish?
Yeah. Yes, we did. And our business meetings, they started to be conducted in English in 1942.
Why did they decide to do the business meetings in English?
Because there were so many of these younger ones that couldn't express themselves in the Danish language. And they thought that if to keep our church going, they should start with the English language so that the young people could partake in it. So that was, and I've kind of translated the Danish from 1893 to 1942. The records, I've translated them. That was a couple of years a job.
Oh, that's good, so that people in the future that can't read Danish can understand what actually went on.
Yeah. Now,
Did
the first minister was Pastor A.S. Nielsen. He was the one that really was the one that got the Danish colony started here.
How many families came with this first colony group?
Well, there were 3. There was a Pastor Nielsen's and my folks, Peter Frost, and then there was another family by the name of Jurgensen. They came together. They were the first 3 families.
Are any of those family members still living in this area besides your family? You?
No, I'm the only one here. I've got one sister living, but she's in Des Moines. She's only 94, but...
Oh, just a young kid.
Yeah. Yeah. But there was one other family that my dad bought the farm out here west of town, and there was another Dane that bought the farm right south of him. That's the old Ben Rodowitz farm. And he came right from Denmark. My dad didn't know anything about him. He didn't know anything about my dad. But he came right from Denmark. And he bought that farm. They lived there for some years. He wasn't really a farmer. He was a doctor's son from Denmark. And he came over and he bought this, and of course he didn't know anything. And then he went back to Denmark and was married. And he married a pastor's daughter in Denmark. Well, it meant something to this community. It's too bad they didn't do something to help him, because they had a little more culture than the rest of them. And like their name was Levine. He was a Danish Jew. So she had a grand piano, and they had things a little, but gee, they were a nice family, and they really meant something. But they stayed here some years, and then they left again. Of course, farming those days between the stumps, that wasn't for living.
Speaking of farming, now you have been a farmer, I'd say just about all of your life until you retired into the village of Withee.
Yeah.
How have the farming methods changed since you first started out, or even when your parents started out?
Well, when my parents, they started out, they were right in there between the stumps and in the brush. They plowed between the stumps with walking plow, and they got a little bit. They could grow some potatoes and a few things. And eventually they got the stumps out of the way, but it was always with a walking plow. And I learned to plow with a walking plow. And I did that for quite a number of years. And finally I got a riding plow and thought I was on top of the world. Well, that wasn't exactly what I didn't turn out to be. And I used that for quite a while. And later on, then the tractors came in. And after World War II, I got the second tractor that came in here. So then we did get on top. We were really modern. Well, there was an awful lot of difference between when we started. You walk with a walking plow and plowing that rough ground, break new land all the time. And sure, they milked a few cows, but when my folks, they started, they had a few cows. They couldn't even sell the milk. There wasn't any market for it. So my mother had to put the milk in pans in the cellar and skim it by hand. There wasn't even the separator. They weren't known that time. So she skimmed it, and then she churned the butter and sold it to the company store and home. So then finally, there was a cheese factory started out here in Frenchtown. Hans Nilsson, he started a little cheese factory. Then there was a market for milk. Well, they got 50 cents a hundred, regardless of what the milk tested, because they hadn't heard of a Babcock test yet. But it was a market. At least it put a little bit of money in their pockets. And what could they do here? Sure, my dad was a carpenter. Once in a while he could build a house for somebody, but the houses they built, they weren't much either. And they didn't get much wages. And then in the wintertime, my dad would haul lumber from way up here at Clark and down to Withee and come down through the woods with it. And, well, now, maybe you don't want this.
Yes, no, this is fine.
Well, here's one other instance of what the older people, they had to do. My dad and a neighbor, they had a job to cut wood out on this farm out here where Buchanans used to live. Well, they got $1 a day from daylight till dark on board themselves. The young people, they wouldn't put up with that.
Not today, no.
If it hadn't been for the immigrants, this country wouldn't be what it is. I'm not an immigrant. I'm born here, but I still could say the immigrants, they sure as the Dickens developed this country. And they worked hard, and they never made too much at it. My folks, they retired in 1918. Then I was in the service then, in World War I. Then I came back. Well, the only thing I knew what to do was farm, so we bought a farm. We knew what it was to be pinched, too.
Where did you have your farm?
We had the farm half a mile south and half a mile west. You know where Frank Hendricks lived?
No.
You go out here half a mile, and then you go west about half a mile. We had that farm 12 years. My folks had sold the old farm, but then that fellow, he went bankrupt. So they got the farm back. Well, then we traded farms, so we got back on our old farm. There was a bigger farm then. But it took a while to get that thing would produce anything, too.
Do you recall how many acres that your parents had cleared on their farm?
Well, my parents, they probably, at that time, about 40 acres. Yeah. Yeah. When my dad bought that farm, there was 97 acres. Well, here I'm getting into old history again.
Oh, that's good.
Well, they had to have a place to live. There was a log barn on that place. And then there was a little old log house, but Dad thought that was too bad to fix up. So, and when he bought that farm, there was 10 acres. The west 10 acres of the cemetery belonged to our farm. And Dad, he finally sold that. Then there were 7 acres north of the railroad track. That wasn't any good to him. And see, there had been a little town started down by the river. There was a sawmill down there. Spalding had a sawmill. And there were some little houses, buildings down there. So Dad traded 7 acres of land that were worthless to get a worthless house. So we lived in that. There were 9 of us in that little 3-room house.
So the land you're talking about now is what we know now as near the Riverside Cemetery.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah,
Just to put an area.
yeah, yeah. And then, well, after I took it over, I started clearing some more land, and then we retired in '58. Yeah, and then Kenzie took it over for 10 years, and they gave up. That was too much for them. So, and then now it's been changing hands since, but well, my folks, they finally got there, but those people, they had to get stumps out of the way. Well, dynamite cost money, and money they didn't have. It cost money to get a stump puller, but they did. They got them moved out of the way.
When the people were not working, what did they do for recreation?
Visited. That's about all there was to do. Sure, you'd visit. There was a lot more of that going on than they'd get together and, well, if there was a birthday, goodness me, they had to have a real birthday party. And sure, they'd get together and like these Levines I mentioned before. Well, they'd have Christmas party there, or my folks would have a Christmas party, or a couple of the other families, they'd get together. Well, over at Levine's, that worked pretty good, because after they'd had their good Christmas meal, why, then the men would play cards for a little while, and the women would visit. And after a while, well, then the chairs would be pushed out of the way, and Mrs. Levine, she could play the piano, then they danced. And they would sing songs, but that was one thing they did a lot of those days. When they'd get together like that, they'd all sing. Nowadays, it was kind of going out of style. This new pastor we've got, he's going to be different on that.
Yeah, he enjoys singing.
Yeah, yeah.
Kind of the older methods. He's from the old school of ministers.
Yeah.
Now, was the church very instrumental in the kind of recreation that they had for their young people?
Well, the Young People's Society was, of course, it was sort of a branch of the church. We were sort of under their supervision, but they really didn't tell us anything. We would have young people's meeting and gymnasium and things like that, parties over there. There was a few rules that they didn't allow. We couldn't play cards and you couldn't dance over there. But otherwise, it was pretty. Everything was pretty free. It was really the young people that got the idea and got started to build the assembly hall, or the parish hall. There was, you never knew. You know, Jess Miller was gone. There were Jess Miller and Tom Miller. They were contractors, and Jess Miller was one of the young people. And Jess Miller, he was determined we needed something like that here. So they went to work on it. There was some opposition, because they said, well, it'll just end up as a dance hall. But that opposition, it disappeared. And then Jess and Tom Miller, they bid on the job, and they built the assembly hall as it was in the beginning for $1,800. We've spent many thousands on it since.
About what year approximately was that built, you know?
About in 1908 or something like that. Yeah.
That has seen a lot of activities in it since then.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
You'd almost wonder what the church would do without the hall there.
Yes.
It has so many things,
Yeah.
funerals and programs and Sunday school.
Yeah. Well, I'm telling you, a lot of things. Maybe you.
No, this is good, because these reflect our history in this area real well.
Yeah.
Things that probably I wouldn't think about.
Well, of course, many years people, they had to come with horses. Some of them had buggies, some of them didn't. They had a lumber wagon. So, but they'd come to church. In the weather and roads, they had to be almost impassable if they didn't get there. But nowadays we're a little more tender about the weather. Well, let's see, how far did we get? Minister's first one, new church was built in '58, and recreation, we've covered that.
Okay, the new church, you say, was built in 1958. How did they go about getting money for the church?
Well, the pastor, Clayton Nelson, was here then, and he took a year to get this idea across, and we needed a new church. But to just jump and say, oh, we're going to build it, that you have to do some preliminary work there, and Clayton Nelson did a wonderful job on that. Then one Sunday we had a kickoff dinner over here, and we were to go out in teams, two in the team, and we'd get the number, or the people we had to call on. Then we reported in by evening. Well, that Sunday evening, we had been out that afternoon. The Sunday evening, we got in there, and in cash and pledges, we had $30,000. So we had to borrow a little money, but it was these pledges that were only for 3 years, and we didn't lose anything on them. By that time, we could pay our debts, so the church was paid for.
People really stood behind their church then when they wanted it.
The church cost us, I think it was 50 or 52,000. Yeah. But it didn't take us very long. After we got going on, everybody just pitched in. We had the best time when we were building that church. We enjoyed that more than anything you can imagine. Everybody, those that were skeptic in the beginning, they switched right over. Yep.
When they did make a decision to do it, then everybody, instead of hanging back, they
I could tell
agreed
you
with it.
something that amused me about it. No, you don't want that in there.
Yes, go ahead.
Well, one that was very much opposed to it was old Jensen Jensen. And he'd catch me. I happened to be president of the congregation at that time. So he would jump me every time he'd meet me in town. He'd even drive past, he'd stop in and try to tell me how impossible it was. Well, it kept on, but Jensen, he couldn't be changed until the last time they had confirmation in the old church. There was a big class, and that church was jam full. I was afraid the thing was going to collapse. And they were standing way outside on the sidewalk, and Jensen and I were out there. Well, Jensen, he came over to me and he says, Alfred, he said, I guess we need to build a new church. That worked.
He finally saw the light.
Yeah, but it was fun. We really had a good time building that church.
When people are working together, probably this is, you forget a lot of your other problems and you have a common goal.
Yeah. Well, but we really haven't had it wasn't near as much of a problem for us as it was when they built the first church. When the old settlers, they came in here, they were poor as churchites, most of them. They had to have a church. It only cost, I guess, $600. But they were still in debt. But eventually it got paid for.
When was that first church built?
In I was born in 94. I think it was built in 1896, I think.
Approximately.
Yeah, that's about right. Mm-hmm. Pretty close, anyway. But they made it, and it was a cold old box, but
it served the purpose.
Yeah. But they had to pitch in and help.
Are there any of the same problems that you see today that they had years ago?
Well, I don't know.
How about the schools?
You mean
How about the schools?
The schools? Well, sure. There were always a battle over school districts. Somebody was wanted some of this district, and they wouldn't let go of it, and there was always battles about that. But they always got settled somewhere or other. But I went to Frenchtown School. That's the only place I ever went to school. So, but there was in the Spring Valley. They belonged to the Frenchtown. Well, they wanted to get away from it. Well, they wanted a little bit too much of a Frenchtown district, so there was a little bit of a battle about that. But they didn't get more than they were entitled to.
Did you go to Withee High School?
Never went to high school.
Were you too busy working?
I didn't want to go.
Oh, you didn't want to go. Whereas in those days, not that many people went to high school either.
Yeah. Well, my folks wanted me to go. and I didn't want to go. I was a fair student, but I didn't enjoy school. I'd rather work. And I told him, well, if you're going to make me go to school, I'm going to run away. So, so I got out of it.
Now, do you have any advice for young people today? Your years of seeing the way that the community has changed and the way the world has changed. Any advice for the young people?
Well, sure it has changed. I don't think the young people, they share quite the home life we shared, for one thing. I think you do in your home, but there's an awful lot of them that don't. And after all, that's part of it. And of course, our main interest at that time was this young people's society, and we could go to Chautauqua once in a while, and sometimes a fellow would go to the high school dances.
What was this name that you mentioned before?
Chautauqua.
What is that?
Oh, they used to have these. They'd come around and have lecturers and things like that, and the speakers that were supposed to be something out of something special. They used to have that in the Woodman Hall. Yeah. Well, that went on for quite a few years, but that's something that's died out years ago.
What did they talk on? What type of subjects?
The subject, with these speakers, and sometimes it would be music. It was all kinds of different topics. I suppose, I don't remember, but political or historical or something.
To what do you credit your longevity?
Well, I've been blessed with good health most of my life. That helps an awful lot. And of course, well, I don't know. I haven't been babied, I don't think. But, shucks, I married a good cook, for one thing. That helped some. My mother was a good cook. No, I've had to work, and I've had to work hard, but I don't think that hurts anybody. That's another thing to young people. They don't like too well to get to put into this real hard work. Everything's got to be push buttons. And I think they've got to get over that. Let them go ahead and use their hands, and they know they've got a back that's meant to be used too. So I would say the young people are just a little, they try to get a little bit ahead of the game. In too much of a hurry. You've got to get to making that big money. And you can't. You've got to start from the bottom.
I think that pretty well sums it up as far as...
No, there aren't. Well, the change in this area, well, you can't hardly find a pine stump anymore. And years ago, you couldn't hardly walk for them.
The roads probably have changed around here also.
Yes. This road out here in the spring of the year,
Trunk T.
It was terrible. You couldn't hardly get through in the spring. It was so muddy. Hey, whiz. But strangely enough, people a lot of them they'd walk to church and they'd make it some way or other. And this shouldn't go on.
When the three Danish families, your family and the other two families, moved in, how many other people were there actually in this area already?
Oh, there were a lot of French people. See, this area was really French in the beginning. Frenchtown was all Frenchmen. And then the Germans, they started moving in about the same time as the Danes, but they didn't, there were a lot of Germans, but not quite as many as the Danes, because the Danes, they seemed to flock in here. They came from Chicago, and they came from all over. But see, out in Frenchtown, there was, all the way from where our old farm, or the one right south of us, that was French all the way up through Frenchtown. The Sturgeons and the Labbies and the Duffners and Gilbos and that was all French up there, but they were only woodsmen. after the timber was gone, the Frenchmen, they didn't like to milk cows, and they didn't like to clear land too well either. So the Danes, they came in, they were just too dumb, I guess. They bought this land and they developed it. And the Frenchmen, they moved out, and well, some of them moved to town. Sturgeons, they moved to town, had a hotel. Duffners, they built a hotel. And, Gilbert Sturgeon, he had a dray line, and, they moved in and got to doing different things, but worked in the lumber yard. But as the Danes, they moved in, and the Germans, there were some right across the farm where our old farm out there was the Brandt family, they moved in. They moved here in the fall when my folks, they came in the spring. And the Brandts, they were German. And they were a big family. They came over here from Glenwood. They were, what do you call them now? That made barrels. Coopers.
Oh.
Yeah. And that factory shut down over at Glenwood City. So they came over here and bought land. And there was the Brandts and the Brookerts and the Nymigs. And there were several of those families. And they were big families. So it spread out.
Today we have what Withee is, with a real mixture of...
Yeah, well, Withee, when my folks, they came to Withee, well, my dad didn't want to come here very bad. He was going to back out, and the Pastor Nilsson says, listen, Mr. Frost, if you don't go along to Withee, I won't go. There won't be any colonies started. Well, Dad was soft to the touch, I guess. So they moved up here. The day they traveled together, these Jurgensons and Pastor Nilssons and my folks had all their furniture and stuff in one car. But they came up on the passenger train, got to Withee at noon. And they got off the train, and Mother, she says to Dad, what in the world have you gotten us into? The pine stumps are right up to the depot, and the pine logs were lying there. But Dad, he would have quit, but a couple of times. But Mother says, no, we're in it. We're going to see it through now. So, and to top it off, they didn't have enough money so they could get out of here.
That sometimes helps while you stay.
Yeah.
Now, did they come right from Denmark, or did they come
No.
from Denmark to someplace else and then here?
No, my folks, they came from Denmark. They landed in Cedar Falls, Iowa. They weren't even married when they came across, but they came at the same time. And they stayed in Cedar Falls for, I think, 3 years. They were married there. Then they moved to Chicago. My dad was a carpenter. They lived in Chicago 12 years. But they were always thinking they were Danes, they had to be farmers. Well, so Dad, he bought a piece of land in Iowa, bought in the wintertime. Well, somebody finally asked him if he knew what he'd bought. Well, he'd bought 80 acres down there. Yeah, they said, you bought a big swamp. So he let that go. Then later on, then he went to Tyler, Minnesota. He was buying a farm there, but they couldn't give him a clear title to it, so that went up the spout. And then this colony business came up. See, those days in the Synod conventions, and then they had something, it was kind of a society that would promote these things. They didn't promote this with you. Well, that was through the Synod. Spalding came to the church convention in Walpaca, and he had this land for sale, and he wanted to get somebody interested, and he would pay for somebody to come up here and look it over. And they did. I don't think my dad was in. There was a committee that came up, and they says, well, there was a chance here. Well, then my dad and some more, they went up there and looked at it, and Dad, he thought, no. He said to Pastor Nilsson, no. He said, this looks too tough. The next day, they were smart. They took him for a ride down toward Greenwood, and of course, it had been developed from the south. There were beginning to be some farms. Well, it looked a little more hopeful. And then I gave him the daddy tumble. So we got up here. Now, why in the heck they wanted me? I don't think they needed me very bad. We were 9 of us in that little bit of house, and it was just nothing but a little shack. Cold, the wind blew right through it. The wind didn't have to stop when it got to that house. And They came in '93, and I was born in '94.